your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with Alex Phillips and myself, Mercy Moroki. I am back in my seat after a short break. It's great to be back.
Yep, just come back as well.
Yeah, you've been on holiday.
Back indeed. Well, we are with you until midday, getting straight to the point of the day's biggest stories and bringing you lots of discussion, expert guests, and even our opinions, as well as yours.
Yes, and we'd love to hear those opinions, so get them in on our email, gbnews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to as many as we can throughout the programme, but first, it's time for the latest headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is going to set out a £29 billion plan later today to freeze energy bills for 6 months. Now, paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies, he says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree. They describe the opposition's plans as an illusion. Ministers are coming under increasing pressure to do more to address the rising cost of living. The Shadow Financial Secretary, James Murray, told GB News that the Conservative leadership candidates don't have a plan to ease the crisis.
We've got a zombie government in number 10. We've got 2 Conservative leadership candidates who haven't got any plans of their own, which will really match the scale of the economic emergency that we're facing. And so what we're saying is, here is a plan. Here is a fully costed, fully funded plan that will provide real help to people over the winter, and we'll start putting that investment into insulation of homes across the country that's needed for the long term.
Conservative MP Brandon Lewis, who's backing Liz Truss in the Tory leadership race, told us he thinks that Labour's plans are unrealistic.
What we've seen from Labour today is something that to an extent is uncosted, and what they have outlined, I have to say, is something that's going to cost in the region of what we spent on furlough through the whole of COVID. So quite a big pressure on public finances. What we've been setting out, what Liz has been setting out, is a fully costed programme with the commitment to an emergency budget to look at what more we can do in a structured and professional way.
Iran's foreign ministry says Sir Salman Rushdie and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left the author with life-changing injuries. Rushdie's now off a ventilator but's been left with life-changing injuries. His son says his father's feisty and defiant sense of humour remains intact. The 75-year-old author was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The government announced that the annual increase in rail fares across England will be lower this year than the rate of inflation. Ticket price rises are traditionally linked to July's retail prices index, which is yet to be published. But the Department for Transport said in addition, that the increased prices will be delayed until March in a bid to help struggling households. Ministers are urging telecoms companies to offer more discounted tariffs to low-pay customers. A new government scheme is going to enable internet and mobile providers to check, with permission, whether a user is entitled to a reduced rate. Figures show that whilst many providers offer so-called social tariffs, only 1% of those eligible have signed up to the scheme. The heatwave will be broken today as 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms are now in place for parts of England and Wales. The Met Office says there's a high risk of power cuts and flash flooding. Scotland and Northern Ireland had similar yellow warnings in place from yesterday morning as heavy rain hit the region. A hosepipe ban will be imposed in Cornwall and parts of Devon from the 23rd of this month. South West Water says it's the first time in 26 years they've had to implement the measures, despite making vast improvements, they say, to the water storage there. They are the 6th water company in the UK that's had to introduce restrictions after an official drought was declared across parts of England on Friday. The taste for craft beer continues to boom, with about 200 new breweries opening last year. The demand for premium artisan drinks has gone up, with almost 2,500 breweries across the UK, following a surge in independent beer makers. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with myself, Mercy Moroki, and Alex Phillips on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up today.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has put his party's proposals to deal with increased energy costs forward. Proposals that seem popular with Tory voters, according to one poll. We'll be discussing that in more detail.
And small boat crossings are now at double the figure they were at this time last year, with over 20,000 people crossing the channel since January. We'll be asking, is it time to ditch the Rwanda plan and take more urgent measures? Stay tuned for that.
And the hot weather warnings are now over, but the Met Office has issued new weather warnings, this time for flash flooding and thunderstorms. Is this a one-off event, or are we going to have to get used to far more extreme weather? More on this later.
Yes, we've got that coming up and much more as well across the programme. As we say, we're here till midday, so we have lots coming up, and you can get in touch with your views. Tell us what you think about everything we're discussing. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. But first, Alex gives her views on Labour's call to freeze the energy price cap.
Winter is coming. I know it's hard to believe as the country is frazzled into European Sahel, as sleeping at night has become like extreme SAS training trying to catch 40 winks in the caldera of an active volcano. But soon, all that heat clamming up your bed sheets will be gone, and you'll be begging for even half a degree of it as your teeth chatter and your shower coughs out a few dribbles of lukewarm water, while windscreen scraping becomes a thing again. Yet, according to the headlines, nobody really has a clue what to do about it. There's the Starmer plan, which involves just paying for everything, plugging the energy price cap at last year's limits, costing the country in the region of 60 billion quid a year, about the same amount as furlough, which arguably helped get us into this mess. Even if it also means helping Rishi to pay to heat his new monster-sized swimming pool currently under construction. That's ridiculous, decries their ever-active oft-sourced Liz Truss campaign team, who proudly brag about not even giving a single penny in handouts and somehow growing the economy instead, even though factories will be forced to switch off the lights and only makers of thermal underwear will think investing in Britain is a good idea. The red wall will indeed turn blue as hypothermia sets in, while even the blue bloods' energy bills will enter the red, as 3 in 4 Tory voters back Labour's plan. It's enough to make for some very blue headlines in the red tops, but that's OK, because the Prime Minister is off on his 100th Holly Bobs of the year, with a shrug of the shoulders and shake of that yellow thatch as he mills around a Greek supermarket near his dad's gaff. It will all be someone else's problem, he must think, as he stocks up the pantry for a winter retreat in the comparatively balmy climes of the Aegean coast. Why does the UK seem totally incapable of making a plan for anything longer than 2 seconds ago? And where even is the government? Does it feel like there is absolutely no sense of urgency as we're being told the country's on fire, the water's run out, and boiling the kettle will cost 100 quid? That's OK. There's enough hot air from the leadership contest to power Sizewell B for the best part of a year.
I loved all your little word plays there, all the little puns. How long did it take you to think of those? That's what I want to know.
I was having my shower this morning. It just came to me in a flash of inspiration as I appreciated warm water coming out on top of my head. Could be a thing of the past.
Yeah, well, it could be indeed. There is it does seem like they're all competing at the moment. And Labour, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, and they're all coming up with quite different proposals, aren't they?
Different.
So at least for once, we have a very clear-cut sort of decision in terms of who you should vote for if energy is your top concern at the moment. Very interesting. But let's get to all of that in just a second, because Tory leadership rivals Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are facing a call to support more low-income families to avert a catastrophe over the winter. This comes as Labour are due to set out their plan for combating the energy crisis today.
Over 70 charities and community groups have written a collective letter warning that more and more families are facing a choice between heating and eating, and the situation is only set to get worse.
That's why joining us now to discuss this further is Emma Burnell, a political consultant. Thank you for joining us this morning. As we were just saying there, wildly different proposals. We've got Rishi Sunak speaking to The Sun today, setting out what he wants. Liz Truss hasn't set out as much, but Labour are in the spotlight today with their plans. What can we expect from all of that?
I think it's very interesting. What you're getting at the moment are the quite short-term emergency plans. And I think even Liz Truss, who wants to do something very different, Rishi Sunak has a small emergency plan, Keir Starmer has a larger emergency plan. You'd probably expect that because Labour generally would be more in favour of state intervention, Conservatives less in favour. But what I think is really interesting is actually the real divergence is in the long-term approach to the economy. And that divergence is between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss as much as it's between Labour and Conservative. And where I think there's going to be real difficulties for the Tory party in the next 2 years, as Liz Truss finally gets into... I mean, we all know she's going to win, right? I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. When Liz Truss takes over, which we've known she's going to do for weeks, there's been this period of inertia. Periods of inertia are never good for government because while they're not doing anything, they're not planning forward. So it's not just the 6 weeks or so that they're not doing anything because the government promised they wouldn't do anything. They're also not planning forward for the 6 weeks after that and the 6 weeks after that. And those are the times that we really are going to have very, very big problems. So that's a big issue. But there's also the problem that Liz Truss was not supported by a majority of Tory MPs. So anything that she tries to do, the big battle has been on the long-term economic approach. And the majority of the people she needs to pass any legislation voted for her opponent and his view on the economy. So I think that's going to leave for a very fractious, very difficult Tory leadership over the next year or so.
One poll today saying that 3 out of 4 Tory supporters actually back Keir Starmer's plans to reduce that energy price cap. And Liz Truss has been very bold about saying she doesn't want to give any sort of handout. She just wants to do this through cutting taxation. Do you think it's likely, given that we're constantly getting updated figures about how high those bills are going to get, that one of the first things she's going to have to do if she gets into power is a crunching U-turn?
Yes, I think she's already talked about having an emergency budget. What that emergency budget will do will almost certainly adopt some of the Labour Party's policy, probably not all of it, and she'll try to make a big deal about the difference. It'll be Labour light, essentially. She will... Again, that will probably pass because she'll be immediately elected. But at the moment, the problem is that the electorate that she's talking to, the electorate that she cares about, is the very small electorate of Tory members. So even those 3 in 4 Tory voters aren't her current audience. How she then pivots to talking to both them and the rest of the country, that's going to be a really, really hard task for her.
What do you make of this Telegraph piece that says a source has said that she could strip actually the £400 energy bills discount from higher earners, perhaps as a way of saying, look, I am very much focused on the lowest income people. And in fact, Rishi Sunak has said he would give his own payment to charity, which is, you know, stunning and brave. But could that not be a good idea? Because it signals that actually her concern is with the lowest earners.
It's always difficult when you start targeting particularly emergency measures. One of the reasons that furlough was so broad, because it was brought in very quickly, and to target something, you have to have really sharp implements in place to make sure that targeting works. Even with furlough, those of us who were a certain type of self-employed will tell you it really didn't work for us. Yeah. So there are real complications, which is why often universality, particularly on an emergency measure, is actually cheaper in the long run, because what you're not doing is having to invest very quickly in the machinery to make that targeting work. So I would suggest that if she wanted to do long-term measures that hurt the rich more and helped the poor more, maybe tax cuts not the way to do that, but there are ways of doing that she could bring in that were better than simply talking about cutting these emergency measures.
Inflation's been the biggest sort of battleground. It feels like an amorphous topic that everyone thinks they've got the solution to tackling inflation, and nobody here is the economist with the secret recipe. And that's also now happening to Keir Starmer's proposal, him saying that actually by capping the energy prices, that will actually help bring inflation down by reducing the cost of, I suppose, manufacturing, storing, transporting goods. But then think tanks saying, well, that's all very well, but it's only going to poke back up again in the long term, and you're going to be still left in a big fat mess.
I mean, this is why this has to be a part of a package of measures that also involves long-term thinking. So I know that they had 7 measures, and the last 2 were much more about sort of investment, doubling the renewables and insulating homes to save money in the longer term. So I do think there needs to be a pivot into long-term thinking, but this emergency measure should bring down inflation for the time that it's imposed.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really complicated stuff, and of course we will be bringing you all the updates on that, including Labour's plan that they'll be announcing today, that £29 billion package, which it's easy for them to say because they're not in government and they don't have to find all that money, I suppose, although they do say it's costed.
They did cost it,
They do say it's costed, but it's easier to say when you're not in government that you'd be given, you know...
Doing more work than the government now, it seems.
Thank you there for joining us. Now, after the break, we're going to be discussing migrant crossings because the number who've crossed this year is already at double what it was this time last year. And we'll be talking about all those figures and asking what the government are actually planning on doing about it. That's after this weather. Don't go away.
Got a more unsettled day as there'll be scattered heavy showers and thunderstorms developing across the country. Let's have a look at the details. By midday, the southwest of England's going to have a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. Some of these will be quite heavy and potentially thundery too. It's going to feel quite warm and humid. Across the southeast of England, it's going to be a largely dry day with plenty of hot and hazy sunshine. It won't be long before some scattered thunderstorms develop later on. There's going to be plenty of warm and hazy sunshine across South Wales this lunchtime, but also a scattering of heavy and potentially thundery showers. To the Midlands, and it's going to be hot and humid this lunchtime with plenty of hazy sunshine. There'll also be scattered showers around, some potentially quite heavy and thundery. Some places will stay dry altogether. It's a mixed picture this afternoon across northeast England. It's going to be warm and humid with some sunny spells and scattering showers. In Scotland now, and showers could merge into longer periods of rain across southern Scotland this afternoon. Some of that will be quite heavy at times. It's feeling cooler than it has over the weekend. In Northern Ireland now, and there'll be further thundery showers expected this afternoon, perhaps leading to some even localised flooding, spells of sunshine in between. Temperatures are lower than recent days, but feeling more humid. So thundery downpours will continue through the rest of the day with a Met Office yellow warning in force. That's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10:20 and this is To The Point with Alex Phillips and myself, Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
More than 20,000 people have been detected crossing the English Channel in small boats so far this year, government figures reveal. Some 607 were detected on Saturday, the third time the total has topped 600 since the start of 2022. It takes the provisional total for the year to 20,017.
Yes, well, our home and security editor, Mark White, joins us now to talk about these figures. It really does feel like in this debate, for the best part of a year or two, we've been saying a new record has been set, and we're saying it again, aren't we, Mark?
Yeah, good morning, both. It was really just a week ago I was talking about there being 18,000 who have now crossed. Well, in just 7 days, we are now up at 20,000. In fact, more than that, because on Sunday, 280-odd have crossed. And again, today, our camp producer is telling us that more have come across. In the early hours, you see, this is a Dover lifeboat coming into Dover Harbour with 50 people on board. And that was followed by vessels at first light this morning coming across. So we are, without a doubt, heading towards at least double the number by the end of this year who crossed compared to last year.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, this figure I found this morning, 15,000 have come since the Rwanda policy was introduced. I mean, that is a massive indication that the very existence of the policy has certainly not deterred people from coming. What will the government now be looking to do? Will they be looking to move the Rwanda policy forward quicker?
Well, interestingly, both of the candidates, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, are both wedded to the Rwanda policy. In fact, they say that they would extend that. They're looking for other countries that may want to receive asylum seekers for processing as well. But they need to get beyond what is a legal issue around the challenges that we see using European human rights legislation under the ECHR. Now, both candidates have said they would look at the possibility of pulling out of the European Convention on Human Rights if they can't get it to work. But they've not said they will do that. And they say that they want to push through this British Bill of Rights that would enable the UK courts to take a narrower definition of what a refugee is. But while you're in the ECHR, that particular treaty takes precedence. So at the end of the day, you can still and you will be able to challenge it. So we'll see what happens going forward. But for the moment, at least, both candidates saying they're not yet ready to pull out of the ECHR.
I mean, 20,000 is an enormous number. Do we have any idea where these people are going when they get into the country?
Well, I mean, where they're going is into hotels, the vast majority of them. About 2.5 months ago, we did a report, extrapolated some of the latest figures, which showed us that 30,000 hotel rooms are being block booked by the Home Office every single day. Now, since we did that report, Alex, another 10,000 people have crossed the channel. And a good proportion of those will be in hotel accommodation. There's hardly a town in the UK which isn't now seeing one or more hotels in their towns being co-opted for use by the Home Office to house these migrants.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for always keeping us up to date on this. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again, not very... talking about new records being set, Mark, quite there. Our Home and Security Editor. And here to talk about this in more detail is Ivan Sampson, who's an immigration lawyer. Thank you, Ivan, for joining us this morning. I'm sure you would have seen an article last week, I think it was, saying 4 in 10 of the people crossing the channel were actually Albanian, which is, last time I checked, not a war-torn country. Why do you think... I don't know how to say this, but there are lots of people who think we're essentially being taken for mugs, and they would have taken those figures as very much proof that these people are not asylum seekers. What would you say to that?
Well, if they're not genuine asylum seekers, they should be removed from the UK. We have an obligation under the Convention to entertain asylum applications from genuine asylum seekers. But this is the issue. How do you define that without first accepting an application? And they've got to go through that process and then a decision made on that process, whether they're genuine or not, whether they have a well-founded fear of persecution. Talking about the figures, I mean, since 2018, the increase has been 80-fold of people crossing the channel. It's gone up 3-fold since 2020. And on that trend, in the next 2 to 5 years, we're probably going to get about 100,000 people crossing the channel every year.
If you deal with these people, what is the provenance of many of these migrants? We've heard 4 in 10 coming from Albania. A lot of them, of course, throw their passports into the sea, so we may never know what nationality they truly are. But one imagines they must have had to pass through a number of EU countries before reaching Calais.
Well, before we left the European Union, we had a right under the Dublin Convention to return those who could have claimed asylum elsewhere. And we were returning about 70,000 a year under that convention. Since we left the European Union, we can't do that. I mean, look, our borders are porous. There is simply no way that we can stop people getting on the waters. The long-term solution is that we need to have an agreement with the French. And the current Home Secretary and the French just don't get on. I mean, that's the reality. They're not talking. We've got to work with our neighbours across the channel and come up with a solution. The solution is, the long-term solution is to have safe routes for claiming asylum, to have offshore processing centres working with the UNHCR, where you can initially screen asylum seekers. So Albanians, for example, would not even would not be able to come to the UK. See, they want to step on the land, and what you've got to do is stop them getting onto British land.
Can I just ask you...
Process them elsewhere.
Yeah, sure. Can I just ask you something about something you just said there, which is that if we had those sort of safe routes or other ways of processing them without them having to make these illegal crossings, then that would cut down the number of illegal crossings. Would it, though? Because, as you say there, somebody from Albania would obviously not qualify, as an asylum seeker. They wouldn't be able to say, look, I'm fleeing war. But wouldn't they still then just use these illegal routes to enter the country?
No, because you could have offshore processing centres. Look, we could do what the Australians do, which is tow them back into international waters. Bit difficult in the Channel. But, the British government, the last minute, would tow them back to France. But then you get a seesaw effect. No, the reality is, if we had humanitarian visas for claiming asylum, we're probably going to get about 100,000 applications a year anyway. So the number of genuine asylum seekers will increase, but the number of illegal asylum seekers would decrease. So the fact is that we take a smaller proportion of asylum applications than nearly all of our European partners. And so for Germany, we're accepting over 100,000. France is accepting over 100,000. We accept about 20. So if we and the government doesn't want to have safe routes for asylum because they know full well they'd be taking about the same number, about 100,000 genuine refugees a year. So that's a political problem for the government.
So it seems to me that, I mean, whatever approach the government takes, it's not going to actually really bring down the net number of those people coming over to the UK, whether it's through an unsafe and illegal route or whether it's through a formal route. Have we got a good system in place to deal with people when they get here?
We don't. I mean, I don't know whether you read David Neal's report in July, who is the chief inspector, border inspector. And his report was just damning because we simply don't have proper processes for dealing with asylum seekers. I mean, if I told you that there's 500,000 illegal entrants in the UK already, the 20,000 pales into insignificance. I mean, the Home Office is doing nothing about them. They're here illegally, 500,000 people. The asylum processing system is slow. It's aimed at refusals. It's not a fair system. And the Home Office is muddling through a disjointed, inefficient asylum processing system. It doesn't work. Look, I'm going for an asylum screening interview tomorrow with a young man who's claiming asylum because of I can't give you more information, but that's going to take about 1.5 years before we get a decision. I mean, 18 months. The asylum screening interview will happen tomorrow, and then it'll be about 1 year before we have a full interview, and maybe 6 months later we might get a decision. So the system is crashing, and I've said, and I've been told I'll get in trouble for this, but she needs to go. Priti Patel needs to go. We need to get somebody heading the Home Office who's going to clear up this mess, and she's not the right person for it.
Well, you're not going to get in trouble from us, that's for sure.
Tough words, Ivan, we love it.
You can say what you want about Priti Patel, well, within reason. Look, thank you for speaking about to us about this. It's obviously a very big issue. It's going to continue, and sadly, there are no easy answers. Ivan Samson there, an immigration lawyer. What are we going to do about it? I don't know what the answer is anymore.
I've always maintained, actually, that we have huge shortages in the sort of lowest level or the lowest tier of workers, where we've always depended upon migrant workers to do those jobs. And rather than put largely healthy young men in hotel rooms, I just can't see the problem in saying we need people to pick fruit. Sorry, I just think it's, maybe that's too naive and...
But isn't that sort of the problem, that isn't the reliance or the idea that you can use that very cheap labour to sort of prop up those sorts of industries? But yes, they do need that labour, but wasn't that sort of what was part of Brexit in a way? They were saying, look, we don't want this reliance on cheap labour. We want jobs for people in this country first. We don't think people should just sort of get given these really low-paid jobs and undercut the UK workers.
The jobs we need in this country are the skilled jobs. The difficulty we have, of course, is our demographic triangle. A huge amount of people at the top who are far too old to do these jobs and not enough at the bottom who, would actually desperately love those jobs.
I think I have a lot of time, actually, for that argument. I'm not saying it's wrong. The argument that we need to do something with this massive unused workforce, because the majority of them are young, fit, healthy men, and the idea that they are just sitting there idle, nothing to do in a place they don't like. It's costing well over 5 million a day now. It would be, because it was £5 million a day before. So lots of complicated issues, but we've already got some of your views on this, so we're going to be going to your views on that very shortly. But for now, we're going to take a quick break. And after the break, apparently 3 in 4 Conservative voters back Labour's plans to tackle energy price hike. But what is the plan that makes them so popular? We'll be discussing that in more detail after these headlines.
Good morning. It's 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is going to set out a £29 billion plan later today to freeze energy bills for 6 months. Paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies, he says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree, describing the opposition's plans as an illusion. Iran's foreign ministry says Sir Salman Rushdie and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left the author with life-changing injuries. The 75-year-old author was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The government has announced that the annual increase in rail fares across England will be lower this year than the rate of inflation. Ticket price rises are traditionally linked to July's Retail Prices Index. Those details are yet to be published. The Department for Transport said, in addition, the increased prices will be delayed until March in a bid to help struggling households. A hosepipe ban is going to be imposed in Cornwall and parts of Devon from the 23rd of this month. South West Water says it's the first time in 26 years they've had to implement the measure, despite making vast improvements, they say, to water storage. They are the 6th water company in the UK that's had to introduce restrictions after an official drought was declared across parts of England on Friday. Well, many parts of the UK are braced for 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms. The Met Office says there's a high risk of power cuts and flash flooding across parts of England and Wales from today. Scotland and Northern Ireland saw similar yellow warnings in place from yesterday as heavy rain hit the region. Well, the southwest and the southeast of England are expected to stay on alert until Wednesday. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10:37 and this is To The Point with Alex Phillips and myself, Mercy Muraki, on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yeah, we touched on the cost of living crisis earlier on in the programme and what our future Tory leaders are proposing to do about it. And now, the Labour Party are weighing in and calling for the governments to tackle rising energy costs.
Yes, Sir Keir Starmer has set out Labour's £29 billion emergency plan to stop energy bills rising over the winter. He says it's paid for in part by an extension of the windfall levy on the profits of the oil and gas companies.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is Peymana Assad, a Labour councillor in Harrow. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess you welcome your party leader's policies.
Of course I do. I think it's a really good plan and will actually help the poorest in society, specifically people on the prepayment meters, people who use sort of a card to top up and then use energy that way. I think that these plans will actually help families struggling in the winter. And obviously these are short-term plans, specifically one, to freeze energy bills for all domestic energy customers, and two, to help those on prepayment meters pay the same as those who pay for their bills monthly.
Plans. It doesn't just help those who desperately need the help. Capping the energy costs for everybody also helps those who can well afford to pay the higher prices. And it's coming out of the pockets of everybody at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, I think everyone needs help. I mean, regardless of how much you earn and what your income is, energy prices are rising and people do need help. I mean, we only saw that in the debates with Conservative leadership candidates. People were standing up and saying, yes, I have a good job and yes, I earn money, but that doesn't mean that my energy bills aren't increasing. So I think that this helps everyone struggling in this time, specifically in winter. So I think these are short-term plans to try and ease the pressure on families across the UK. And Labour obviously has long-term plans too, specifically the one about the warm homes plan, which means, you know, investing in insulating homes up and down the country. So I think these are short-term plans that will ease pressure for families up and down the country in the short term. And I think everyone's struggling, not just those who are really, really poor, but this is targeted help. And, you know, I have constituents really struggling, and I think that this would really playing field, as people say.
Yeah, I'm interested in this idea of sort of tinkering with the cap. We know that it's set by Ofgem, which is the independent regulator. I mean, what's the point of an independent regulator if the government's just, or Keir Starmer's just going to dictate what they can and can't set as their cap?
Well, politicians are there to try and provide solutions and ideas to try and ease difficulties and times of crisis. This is a time of crisis. This is a time of difficulty. And that is what government and politicians are meant to do. Unfortunately, as a Labour councillor, I haven't seen anything provided by the government at the moment to ease pressure for families up and down the country. People are waiting to hear from the Conservative leadership candidates, and unfortunately we're just stuck in this leadership race, yet to see what the government's actual policy plans will be put in place. And I think the Labour Party has been able to provide that leadership. You know, we were the ones that called for the windfall tax in the first place. And so I think it's right for us to be saying that we are going to close the loophole, which would give billions back in allowances to oil and gas producers. And so I think backdating that levy to January, when Labour first called for the windfall tax, would actually help bring in the money that would actually ease family situations up and down the country.
Surely the problem with this policy is it's around 30 billion quid just for 6 months, which is a huge amount of money. And at the same time, if you're getting some of that off, companies that shore up pensions, for example, and essentially taxing profits, you're saying that we're going to spend a heck of a lot of money in the short term. We're not having an eye on what's going to happen in the future. And no business is going to want to come and invest in Britain. And so we're going to be riddled with a slow economy, potentially with recession for many months after that. And, you know, the Labour Party's just wafted a load of money for 6 months, essentially going into the pockets of absolutely everybody.
No, I don't think that that's the case. I think what the Labour Party's done here is actually offered a solution, an idea to try and ease the situation, specifically in winter, specifically for the most vulnerable people in this country, specifically those on prepayment meters. I think this isn't about us taxing, big business and being against big business. This is about equality. This is about fairness. And I think that people feel the pinch in their pockets and they're struggling, and they see these big companies going away with profits in the billions, whilst other people are having to use food banks and struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills. So I think it's only fair that Labour's plan is to tax those who are taking away billions in profit and reinvest that profit back into the British public.
Now, we mentioned earlier, I think 3 in 4 was the figure of Tory voters say they actually like these plans that Sir Keir Starmer is putting forward. But it's still the case, isn't it, that Labour still have a lot of work to do. They want to beat the Conservatives in the next general election. And in fact, many polls are saying that in a contest between Liz Truss and Sir Keir Starmer, Liz Truss would win that general election. We've had a government that many would call shambolic for the best part of, a decade, some would say, but certainly over the last few months. Why is it that Labour are still, even then, not seen as a party that people can vote for?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons. I mean, obviously, we had two and a half years of COVID, and so it was difficult for the Labour Party to actually go out on doors and take the Labour message to people directly. But I think the by-elections have shown that Labour can get its message out there, Labour can win elections, and Labour can get people on side. I think what Keir Starmer has done is reset the Labour Party, 1, unified the party internally, and 2, set out a proper clear message to the public that 1, we've changed, and 2, we will gain your trust and we will come up with ideas that actually make a difference to your lives. And I think that it's only right that people see that and actually keep an open mind and allow Labour to come up with these ideas like we have done on windfall tax, like we're doing on the economy, to actually show people that we have changed and we are ready for government.
I mean, is the problem, however, you say you're ready for government, but is the problem, however, that, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And these sorts of policies, as attractive as they may be, I mean, no wonder 3 in 4 people wouldn't mind their energy bills being less money. I mean, who doesn't? But isn't the problem that it's very easy for a party in opposition to make these sorts of promises, costing £30 billion for 6 months? I mean, £60 billion for the whole year, which is as much as furlough, which was a pretty extraordinary crisis measure, that if Labour were in government, they couldn't do it because then they've got to somehow recoup the money down the line.
Well, yeah, of course. Labour has a fully funded programme here. They've actually set out how they would cost all of these ideas that they've come up with. But I don't think that it's fair to say that, these are unrealistic ideas and policy proposals, because the windfall tax was an idea that Labour put in their manifesto in 2019, and people were saying that that was crazy then, when actually the government actually took it on. And although they call it something different now, it is a windfall tax. And so Labour is providing the leadership that the Conservatives aren't in this time of crisis. We have, Boris Johnson might still be the Prime Minister, but he's missing in action for a lot of people. And so it's going to take some time. And, we've been working on it, and Labour will continue to work on it to build back trust with the British public. But I fully believe that people now understand that Labour's ready.
Well, we'll see if they are, I suppose, in the next general election. Paymana, thank you for joining us this morning. Paymana Assad there, who's a Labour councillor.
A couple of people have emailed in, actually. It's worth actually seeing what people are saying on this. Marianne says, why do all politicians see the only option to solve our problems is to throw more taxpayers' money at it? It didn't work for the NHS. Put the money into building reservoirs and nuclear plants and tell people to buckle down for a while. Hardliner, Marianne.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Rishi Sunak's plans are sort of focused in one aspect on securing our future supply of energy. He wants increased investment in nuclear, solar, shale and offshore. That's part of his package of measures, which is, I think, any package of measures at this point does very much have to have at its centre the long-term future of energy supply and the United Kingdom becoming, to as much of an extent as we can, dependent on energy we produce here at home, because we've seen what happens when that's not the case and we're so reliant on energy from abroad.
But they say it every time, don't they? Theresa May said she was going to frack. Margaret Thatcher said we need to be building nuclear power stations every single year. And the Tories have now been in government for the best part of 2 decades. And that's been enough time to make up a long-term plan. I mean, it's hopeless, isn't it?
Yes, they are speaking a lot of the times, aren't they, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, like they haven't been in government for 10 years. Right. It's like, you guys want to be doing this already. But anyway, let us know what you think about all that. GB Views at gbnews.uk. UK. Now let's move on to something else. It's the second week of the Ryan Giggs trial, which starts today, the second week, with the former footballer facing charges of assault and coercive and controlling behaviour against his former girlfriend.
Our North West of England reporter, Sophie Weeper, was outside Manchester Crown Court and sent us this report.
We're here at Manchester Crown Court for the second week of Ryan Giggs' trial. He is charged with three separate things. The first is the alleged assault of his ex-girlfriend Kate Greville, where he allegedly caused actual bodily harm. The second is the assault of Miss Greville's sister during the same alleged incident. And the third is of coercive and controlling behaviour of Kate Greville during their relationship between August of 2017 and November of 2020. Mr Giggs has denied all three charges, pleading not guilty. Now, last week, Ms Greville took the stand and gave evidence and was cross-examined by the defence. She described the alleged incident back in November of 2020, where she said she left from a night out alone after the couple had argued. Once Mr Giggs arrived back at the house, the argument continued. The court then heard a 999 call made by Ms Greville's sister, and when she was asked what had happened, she said he headbutted her. There was blood everywhere. The trial is continuing today, and we don't know for sure what's going to happen, but defence barrister Chris Daw QC told jurors last week that we could see Sir Alex Ferguson, former Manchester United manager, and Ryan Giggs' former teammate Gary Neville take the stand here at Manchester Crown Court. We've seen 5 days already. We're expected to see another 5 days this week where, if it sticks to schedule, we could see a sentence for Mr Giggs one way or another by the end of the week.
Well, thank you for that update there. Now moving on to the weather, which is something we haven't been able to ignore. It's been absolutely boiling hot. I've been, maybe too much information, I've been wearing less clothes, fewer clothes in bed than I usually do. I'm usually all snuggled up. I'm quite infamous amongst my friends, but regardless of how warm it is, I just always want to be wrapped up in a blanket, but it's
I have one of those old school, like, rotation circular fans, you know, that we just plug in. And last night in the middle of the night, I'd sort of got out of my side of the bed to wander to the toilet, came back and went over the wire connecting it and sort of knocked it on the floor.
Sounds like a fire hazard to me.
Starting a revolution.
Well, it looks as though the heat wave is finally coming to an end. I mean, in case you hadn't noticed, the southern half of the UK faced drought conditions this weekend, and several water companies imposed hose pipe bans. However, as the amber heat warning comes to an end, the Met Office has issued yet another weather warning.
Yeah, this time, though, it's for flash flooding and thunderstorms. And joining us to discuss this in more detail is Jim Dale, Senior Meteorologist at British Weather Services and author of Weather or Not. Why are we now seeing flood warnings? And is extreme weather contrast something we're likely to see a lot more of in the future, Jim?
Hi, good morning to you both. The reason we're seeing the flood warnings, the thunderstorm warnings, is the transition, basically. This is the transition day, today and tomorrow, a couple of days together, where the cool air is moving in from the northwest, slowly but surely. It's a slow transition, actually. Normally these things can be quite quick, but this one's a slow one, a slow poke. So there's still some quite humid and very warm air in situ, particularly over England and Wales. And that transition means it does set off not just thunderstorms. I'm looking at a radar just directly below me, and it's showing much more light rain and moderate rain than it is, and it's in the west, by the way, and in the central belt of Scotland at this moment in time. Not too many thunderstorms, but I think they'll come along. Is it a sign of things to come? Well, look, when we get hot weather like this, the transition zone always brings its risks of thundery type weather. We change the air mass. We go back to something a lot more, dare I say, British, and that's basically where we are at this moment in time. So yeah, in the future we can expect this to happen, more or less every time we get a hot spell.
I'm a perennial Twitter scroller. I'm always flying through social media to see what people have to say on this subject. And lots of people posting pictures. I don't know the provenance of their, verifiable or not, but saying, look, we had worse drought in the 20s and the 70s. We've had worse floods in this period, that period. Has this been, it's been an exceptional year in the context of recent history. Everyone would agree that. But is it a truly exceptional year in the context of longer history?
Well, first of all, I don't wish to be a killjoy for anybody who enjoys this type of weather. As long as you dress right and you approach it right, in the best way possible, and obviously people have got to be looked after in terms of those that have got problems with this type of weather. That's fair comment. In terms of the future, I think we're going to see this. This is the start of it. I think that the problem that we've got here is that if you look at the UK on its own, you might say, well, yeah, we've had this before, 1976, 1995, 1990, you can pick your apple and your pear and you can compare them together. The problem that we've got here is that you don't do that necessarily when you're looking at potential of climate change. You've got to join the dots around the world, see what's going on in other places. So we know absolutely full well it's not just the UK, it's Germany, it's Spain, it's France, it's the United States, it's Japan. Down in the southern hemisphere, it's New Zealand with their winter and record temperatures there. So. And then you look at the polls, both of them, and what the climatologists are looking at in terms of the increased temperatures there, not just by 0.5 degree or 1 degree on average, but more like 3s and 4s. So all of that adds up, along with the CO2, and we're pushing in this direction. So we have to be wary that these type of events, although they do occur from time to time, they can be exacerbated by the climate change situation that we find ourselves in and the climbing temperatures.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Jim Dale there, Senior Meteorologist at the British Weather Services and author of the book Weather or Not, which is quite the title.
It's a great name. We love that name.
Let's go to a couple of your views before we end the hour. Migration, we spoke about those record figures for migration. We're now at double the number of channel crossings there were this time last year. In Malta, they house illegal immigrants in tents. They are part of the EU, yet the EU and the ECHR allowed this, says Dwight. Mary says, why do we have to take a single asylum seeker anyway? As a country, we should decide who we want to and who we don't want to take. That is we're signed up to international treaties, various treaties, and, we take asylum seekers. That is part of being a civil Western democracy, that those who seek refuge, genuine refuge, should be allowed to come here. The problem is that system is very much being exploited by people who are not genuine asylum seekers, but who are here to be economic migrants and who are not using the legal routes to achieve that.
I really like this one from Bill, just quickly. He says, surely it is about time our politicians of all parties got together in the interest of the country. All of this squabbling is extremely undistinguished. So it is, Bill.
Lovely, Bill. Well, thank you for those views. Keep them coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to more in the next hour. But now, a little reminder that every Wednesday we hand our show over to you. It's your show full of your ideas and what you want to talk about. So get in touch with us. The email is gbviews@gbnews.uk and tell us on Wednesday what you want us to cover, basically. What questions should we be asking? What do you want to hear? Who do you want to hear from? And we will deliver for you. It's gbviews@gbnews.uk for all those suggestions.
Yeah, and do keep your thoughts coming in as well on the same address. And we are going to be back with more on today's top stories and plenty of your views after the break.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. We're transitioning back to more typical UK weather this week. Cloudier and cooler for many. A risk of thunderstorms, but some places over the next couple of days will stay dry. These thunderstorms will be hit and miss. Low pressure has replaced high pressure, and it's brought a lot more cloud and some outbreaks of rain. It's also turning things cooler, but still some sunshine around and still some heat, especially in the east and the southeast during the rest of Monday. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, some outbreaks of rain for central and southern Scotland, some heavy rain here at times, more likely to be showery elsewhere, and just about anywhere could see a heavy shower or thunderstorm this afternoon. Temperatures still reaching 30 Celsius in the southeast, but cooler further north and west, with those temperatures reaching the high teens or low 20s. Through the evening, showers and thunderstorms continue for a time. Again, hit and miss. Some places will avoid them. Some more prolonged rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland, and particularly lively showers there for South Wales and the southwest. Otherwise, again, a lot of cloud cover. Another warm night, actually. Temperatures not falling far below 15 to 18 Celsius. And then we start off Tuesday with further showers, and actually quite a few showers will develop during the day, especially for northern, central and western England, Wales, as well as eastern Scotland. Drier to the far northwest and increasingly brighter, and largely sunny towards the southeast, with temperatures still reaching the high 20s, but back to around average elsewhere. High teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland, low 20s for Western England and Wales. Any showers and thunderstorms will be slow moving on Tuesday afternoon and into the evening. Falling onto dry ground, of course, that could cause some issues where the most intense rain does fall, and lightning strikes and hail and so on. Wednesday sees further showers and thunderstorms in the far south, but Thursday is a drier day for many before more rain in the west later.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point here on GB News. It's 11 a.m. and we've got a show full of all of today's biggest stories coming up for you. We are here until midday. We're also going to be taking lots of your views, so get them in at gbviews at gbnews.uk. But first, here's the latest headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is going to set out a £29 billion plan later today with the aim of freezing energy bills for 6 months. Paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies, he says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over winter. The Labour Party claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree, describing the opposition's plans as an illusion. Ministers are coming under increasing pressure to do more to address the rising cost of living. The Shadow Financial Secretary, James Murray, told us the Conservative leadership candidates don't have a plan to ease the crisis.
We've got a zombie government in number 10. We've got two Conservative leadership candidates who haven't got any plans of their own which will really match the scale of the economic emergency that we're facing. And so what we're saying is here is a plan, here is a fully costed, fully funded plan that will provide real help to people over the winter and will start putting that investment into insulation of homes across the country that's needed for the long term.
Conservative MP Brandon Lewis, who's backing Liz Truss in the Tory leadership race, told GB News he thinks Labour's plans are unrealistic.
What we've seen from Labour today is something that to an extent is uncosted, and what they have outlined, I have to say, is something that's going to cost in the region of what we spent on furlough through the whole of COVID. So quite a big pressure on public finances. What we've been setting out, what Liz has been setting out, is a fully costed programme with the commitment to an emergency budget to look at what more we can do in a structured and professional way.
Iran's foreign ministry says Sir Salman Rushdie and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left the author with life-changing injuries. Rushdie's son says his father's feisty and defiant sense of humour remains intact. The 75-year-old author was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The government has announced the annual increase in rail fares across England will be lower this year than the rate of inflation. Ticket price rises are traditionally linked to July's Retail Prices Index, which has yet to be published. The Department for Transport said, in addition, the increased prices would be delayed until March in a bid to help struggling households. Today marks 1 year since the Taliban took over Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. A national holiday has been declared in the country as citizens are encouraged to celebrate. The Taliban declared control over the city last year amid mass evacuation of US forces and refugees. Humanitarian aid into the country has been cut significantly since the Taliban took over, as world leaders demand greater rights for Afghans, particularly women and girls. Defence commentator Jamil Jafar told GBNews he's concerned over terrorist groups reforming in the country.
An important day for the U.S. to mark the end of that military operation. At the same time, very challenging day because of the people that were left behind and our allies that were left behind, and that we continue to try to get out of that country. And of course, the concern that the Taliban will permit Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to reform there in Afghanistan remains a significant concern with the recent killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri there in Kabul itself.
The heat wave will be broken today as 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms are now in place for parts of England and Wales. The Met Office says there's a high risk of power cuts and flash flooding. Scotland and Northern Ireland had similar yellow warnings in place from yesterday morning as heavy rain hit the region. A hosepipe ban is going to be imposed in Cornwall and parts of Devon from the 23rd of August. South West Water says it's the first time in 26 years they've had to implement these types of measures, despite making, they say, vast improvements to water storage. They are now the 6th water company in the UK that's had to introduce restrictions after an official drought was declared across parts of England on Friday. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Good morning, it's 11:05 and this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Alex Phillips on your TV, radio and online. And we've got another great hour lined up for you, so here's what's coming up.
Yeah, our top story. The two remaining Tory leadership contenders, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, are facing calls to more than double the level of government support to low-income families to avert a cost of living crisis over winter. We'll be discussing it.
And the NHS, as we all know, is struggling with an unprecedented backlog, with some patients resorting to funding their own private treatment to avoid lengthy wait times. We'll be looking at the lengths people have gone to avoid these queues later on in the show.
And it's been 1 year since Kabul fell to the Taliban, and now Home Secretary Priti Patel has expressed her tremendous pride in the government's controversial evacuation operation. We'll be speaking to the former Afghan Chief of Public Health later on.
Yes, that's all coming up and much more as well over the next hour. And get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We will get to your views later on in the show.
But first, Mercy gives us her views on how we're failing A-level students.
Eight years ago today, I was waking up as a university student. I'd woken up the day before after a long wait for my A-level results, logged into the university's office portal and found out that I had got into my first place at university, my preferred place. And I was elated. I grew up in a household where nobody had gone to university, and here I was getting into a Russell Group university. I mean, yes, I was 3 months pregnant at the time and had to take a year out about to have a baby, then take my baby to university with me, which wasn't ideal, nor easy for that matter, but it didn't matter because I had got into university. And back then, university still felt like a golden ticket to a better life. The promise of university was a more prosperous life, a good career, higher earnings. 8 years on, and what a different world it is for today's budding university students. A-level pupils have been told to prepare for disappointment when results are announced this Thursday. The Office for Students has predicted that there will be a spike in the number of applications being rejected. This comes after exam boards were ordered to get a handle on spiralling grade inflation by grading students more harshly than previously. Now, this means that students face opening their A-level results, and instead of the A's and B's their teachers have confidently predicted, they may instead see far more C's than they bargained for. Now, most of us will know a young person in this position, whether it's our own children, grandchildren, or family and friends. And the sad reality is, this cohort of young people coming of age have been the unfortunate victims of a series of unfortunate events beyond their control, events that are having a demoralising and even devastating effect on their futures. Now, whilst it's tempting, I wouldn't go as far as saying young people have never had it so bad. I mean, they're not living in a world war, for one. But nevertheless, the prospects are indeed bleak. A-level students have just had 2 years of educational disruptions because of lockdowns in the most crucial years of their lives so far. Lockdowns in which, by the way, more than half of final year students reported losing their jobs or internships. Only to emerge out of that lockdown being told that even the brightest students could very well miss out on that much coveted place they've worked so hard for. And this all comes at a time when even going to university in the first place is more expensive than ever. The student debt owed to us, the taxpayer, having been borrowed by students, of course, has quadrupled in the 10 years. Last 10 years, the government forecast that the average debt for students who started their courses this academic year will be a whopping £45,800 by the time they finish. And by the way, only 20% of those are even expected to be able to pay back their student loans in full. I actually looked at my student loan this morning and it was at £67,000. That's how much I need to pay back. And there's the fact that universities are cesspits of hardline left-wing ideology with censorship and cultural dogma rife. I mean, never mind education, education, education. Indoctrination, indoctrination, indoctrination is the stock in trade for our once respected universities these days. I mean, even if you're a high achiever and good enough for the likes of Oxford and Cambridge, it ain't looking so good either, because new figures show that for the first time, 4 in 10 UK applicants are turned away from these two elite institutions, as those institutions opt for overseas students instead, who, of course, bring in far more cash for the unis. In fact, in one of our top universities, the London School of Economics, a staggering 70% of students are from overseas, which is an unwelcome reality for those British students who have to fight over that 30%. Look, I don't purport to have the answers to how we can resolve this dire situation for the country's young, and in fact, I fear there are not many quick and feasible answers at all. And in any case, solving the messes the government keeps getting us in is well above my pay grade. But what I am saying is that as the government rightly focuses on what the future will look like, what with spiralling inflation, energy crises, and just a generally crumbling state, it should not lose sight of the people who we will all need in the future. The future taxpayers, the future scientists and engineers, future doctors and nurses. And if we continue the collective industrial level neglect of our adolescents, we do so very much at our own peril.
Powerful stuff, Mercy. I mean, seriously, you are absolutely bang on. I do think that, especially potentially the government we have now, just don't really care about young people, do they? They're not really their voters.
No.
But it's interesting. I've also thought that the previous government, with this target of trying to get every single person to go to university, is creating a system that's essentially a racket.
Yeah.
People are going to study Mickey Mouse courses, coming out of, what, £48,000 debts is the average. I mean, that is insane, which, of course, interest is tied to inflation, so the amount to pay back goes up and up.
But, you know,
and yet, we don't have a skilled workforce. We actually don't have the people we need to work in, you know, factories, in robotics and so on and so forth, that we have to invite the bright and the best from around the world. And I keep thinking that the answer really has got to be apprenticeships and polytechnics, like where people can leave school and really target their skills for an industry ready and waiting to take them. Proper, coherent, long-term planning.
I think there was a lot of snobbery, of course. We are a class-based society, and there has historically been a lot of snobbery. And I think when the Labour government came in 1997, and what Tony Blair was doing was trying to kind of reverse all of that snobbery and put, you know, working class people on equal footing with those middle classes, which was an absolutely noble cause to pursue. But I think we almost went too far by almost over-promising that every single, you know, student can just go to university, no matter how clever you are, no matter, you know, what background you are, no matter what you're interested in, that university is for you, and that if you go, you will be promised a better life. That's not achievable. It's not practical, and it's not desirable either. So I think you're right in terms of we need a focus on apprenticeships, because not everybody is university material, and then they're being, you know, got all this debt, and it's
I
not
wouldn't be
really
so kind
amounting to
about
anything.
Tony either. I think he's trying to massage statistics and get these people off government hands.
Yes, well, it's another conversation for another day. Well, let's move on for the moment to our top story, which is that Tory leadership contenders, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, are facing calls to more than double the level of government support to low-income families. This is to avert the cost of living crisis, of course, especially over the winter period.
Yes, 70 charities and community organisations have signed an open letter to both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, warning that families on benefits face a £1,600 shortfall over the coming months, despite receiving £1,200 in the last government support package.
Yes, well, this comes as the Labour Party announced plans to freeze household energy bills and implement a windfall tax on energy providers if they were to be elected to government. I suppose that's another windfall tax, that would be.
Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called the current energy crisis a national economic emergency amid reports that power stations are preparing to shut down this winter to conserve supplies.
Yes, well, let's look at this further with our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, lots of promises being made. Which ones sound the most realistic to you?
Well, it's interesting that the Labour Party has come forward with a policy that actually has some numbers in it. This is the first time we've seen that after quite a long time of silence. And it's a 25% tax, extra tax on the profits of those energy companies. And that would raise around £8 billion, they say. Now, the policy of freezing the cap where it is would cost £30 billion, their numbers, every 6 months. The IFS says it would run for at least a year, taking us to £60 billion. This is costing month on month more than furlough cost during the COVID pandemic. It's the most extraordinarily expensive policy. And one of the criticisms that we're starting to see of it is that a fairly crude freeze like this means that of that extra spending, much of it unfunded, of that extra spending, half goes to those of above average incomes. And is that the best way to spend tens of billions of pounds that, frankly, the country doesn't have? Perhaps not. So really what we're seeing here is that the Labour Party is coming forward with a policy. It's got people talking about policy, but might it be the most wise way to spend an enormous amount of money, a truly gargantuan amount of money? There are big questions there. For the Conservatives, on their part, however, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak aren't being terribly specific about what help they would provide, simply saying they would provide some more help, but they'd have to wait and see what the situation was like when they got in, which isn't very satisfactory either.
Well, yeah, considering one's just been Chancellor and one is currently in government, you know, sitting in the cabinet every day. Well, probably not. They all seem to be on holiday at the moment. You'd hope they'd have more idea.
You certainly would, but there is something that we could probably take a glint of light from, which is the Treasury is currently drawing up, they say, a number of options that a new Prime Minister could hit the ground running with on day one. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, said last week that the Treasury was undergoing this preparatory work so that there will be options for the next Prime Minister. And also, of course, last week we saw this industry round table in Downing Street with the Prime Minister, with the Business Secretary and with the Chancellor. We didn't really see all that much come from it, but the dialogue had begun, and it's interesting that the people who were reported to have been leading this discussion before the Prime Minister joined, i.e. Nadhim Zahawi and Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor and the Business Secretary, they're two big supporters of Liz Truss. And Liz Truss at the GBNews People's Forum event said that she would want to work with the industry to try and bring down prices. That seems to be something that this roundtable was leaning towards as well. We might see more in that space.
Yes, well, thank you, Tom, for giving us an update on that. And it's interesting you say it's partly unfunded. Labour would say actually it's very, very costed. So let's see what they say about all of that. But now let's analyse this further with political writer and pundit James Melville. James, what do you make of what these three leaders, potential leaders, are offering at the moment for people facing this energy crisis?
Well, I mean, it's an improvement, but it's after the horse has bolted. I mean, if you're looking at the cost of living crisis and also aspects of supply chains, this has been going on for months and months and months. It's been coming down the tracks. And so it seems a little bit like sort of too little, too late. What I want from our politicians, not just the government, but the opposition, is to put things in place before there's a crisis, combined with a long-term strategy. So while this will offer a bit of improvement at sort of an enormous cost in terms of public finances, it's something that has to be done. But I would go further. There has to be a sort of reassessment on certain aspects of taxation policy, not just connected to energy, but fuel, with fuel duty running one of the highest in Europe, and also a conversation about VAT as well. But it's too late. I mean, I was reading today, for instance, that food banks are now struggling to match supply because of the amount of people who are going into poverty. So the cost of living crisis has been going on at an increasing rate for months on end. It's only going to get worse after the winter. And currently we're going through a Tory leadership contest. Parliament is shut because of recess, and then there's party conferences. And still we've got our two main parties trying to work out what their strategy and response is on the cost of living crisis. This should have been done at least 6 months ago.
I mean, do you think the solution is to get the big energy companies around the table? As Tom Hardwick was saying, that's probably the space we need to be looking at, whoever next becomes Prime Minister. I mean, do you think that we should be working with big energy, or do you think that Keir Starmer's approach of retrospectively putting in place a windfall tax and saying, you know, you're profiting, yes, it's not your fault, but you're profiting from a pretty dire economic circumstance for everyone else. You need to put your hands in your pockets?
I would veer towards what Keir Starmer's doing. I think you can combine that with some changes with aspects of taxation, and that makes a lot of sense. But, you know, it's still going to take a few more weeks. I mean, Labour obviously aren't going to implement that until an election, but at least they're coming up with some ideas. The Tories are stuck in some sort of vortex and hiatus because of the leadership contest. It seems to be going on forever and a day. And then the new Prime Minister will come in and put a series of measures in place. But it's way, way, way too late. By the time we actually get policy, government policy, we're going to have hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people who are enduring a form of poverty because of this crisis. And part of that, in terms of blame, is delay in government response. It's just not acceptable. This crisis has been mounting up for months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's as if we don't have a government at the moment. That's what it feels like, really, at the moment. Not really the best time for it. But James Melville, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's go to a couple of your views. I thought this was interesting. Mark says, nice to see Labour still maintains expertise in spending other people's money. Luckily for Britain, Starmer couldn't be a one-legged man in a running race. Clive says, Keir's new plan, typical Labour response, short-term gain for long-term pain. Lots of this stuff. Alistair says, stop borrowing. They forget these short-term plans could have long-term repercussions. Stop borrowing. So lots of people saying, look, this is, we could do all this now. Labour can have this 29 billion plan, but what's this going to look like in the future when we're left with to pick up all the pieces?
Yeah, and I think we should all vote for Paul. He says, I could come up with a better plan if I had the billions to play with. So, Paul, You should be Prime Minister.
My 7-year-old probably could as well, to be honest. But anyway, after the break, from the kindness of strangers to taking out loans, more and more people are being forced to fund their own NHS treatment. We'll be looking at how the health service can cut the ever-growing waiting list after this break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Good morning, it's 11:25 and this is To The Point with Alex Phillips and myself, Mercy Moroki, on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Now, the NHS waiting list grows every day, with some patients waiting years for prospective surgery. The health service is still struggling to tackle the COVID backlog, with patients resorting to loans, kindness of others, crowdfunding or even internet strangers to help fund their private treatment.
Yeah, so what is the solution, and indeed how bad is the problem? Well, let's talk to this about this to GP Dr. Mo Kaki. Dr. Kaki, thanks for joining us this morning. I read a quite shocking statistic in the Telegraph, which is that in the first 3 months of 2021, 69,000 people paid for their own treatment, which was 39% more than the year before. Is this where we're heading now? Those who can afford it, those who are richer, turning to more private treatment, which is better quality, and the rest of us, the poor people, the paupers, having to turn to the struggling NHS?
Hi, afternoon. Well, I certainly hope not. I mean, I think, we need to be really equitable and fair, and we want everybody in the country to have equal access to healthcare when they need it. But you're right, there is a huge demand at the moment, and we are really struggling with a backlog. I think the stats have shown, and I was reading a paper, something like 6 million people on waiting lists, and it's increasing day by day, and we're trying to work out how to deal with it. And I think it is a really, really hard situation. I think we know that everyone is working their utmost in the NHS, but we know that that probably is not enough at the moment to even catch up. So we need to think about new and innovative methods, and we need to think about how we retain and recruit new staff as well. And that's a big challenge.
Frontline, people come to you first to get their problems partially diagnosed, referred on to specialists if it's needed. Do you worry when you see someone enter your clinic and you think they need to be looked at immediately? This could be quite serious, that is not going to happen. Are you seeing people coming back in with problems getting worse because they're not being able to have access to the next stage of care?
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation, because actually that's something that I do really worry about. You know, we have been in the game and treating patients for such a long time that we can recognise when there are three categories. There's either acute, life-threatening, you must go to hospital and get sorted today. You've got the urgent, and then you've got kind of the chronic, which is the longer term. The chronic will get an appointment, it's been going for a few years, but the urgent category is the one I'm really worried about, because we want to see you in a few weeks to a month or so, but we know this could be 3 to 6 months, maybe longer. And that's just for urgent things, and the chronic stuff is even longer. So it's a really big challenge, and it's heartbreaking to know that some of the patients I'm going to see are going to have to wait for a long time for treatment, and actually it's not safe. Now, I think we have to think about solutions as well. And one thing that we know is that the pandemic was exhausting and challenged the NHS staff hugely. And I think a lot of them have been leaving in droves. And I think that's something we need to look at, and look at, one, safeguarding their care, but also making sure that we recruit and retain them, really, support them. The other side of it is going to be recruitment. We need to bring in more people. Ultimately, I know we've closed our borders, but we really need to bring in not just doctors, nurses, healthcare assistants, loads of admin staff, people to run the system. And then we need to put some money in to get new services available, or times when people can work. GPs work 8 to 8, Monday to Sunday. You can see a GP Monday to Sunday, 8 to 8. I think we probably are moving towards that model now for secondary care, because that's the only way to deal with all of these surgical procedures that are waiting to be seen. So we're going to have to get people working on weekends. Now, the existing staff can't work 7 days a week. You know, they'll get exhausted and burn out and leave as well. So we need to bring in new people, but we also need to have sites for them to work. So there's a lot of work to be done to get this sorted.
Well, Dr. Kaki, there is a lot of work. I think we can all agree on that to go until we can sort this out. Hopefully we will one day say, you know, we can clear that backlog and the NHS will be the once admired institution that it once was. Dr. Kaki there giving us his opinion on the NHS backlog and people turning to fundraisers, online fundraisers. There's the gentleman, Rob Weston, who is in the Telegraph, saying he had to turn to an online crowdfunder to basically fund private treatment for himself. £60,000, I think he was trying to.
It's absolutely terrifying. You know, if you know, just any relative I knew happened to get sick at this stage, I would probably advise them, look, do what you can, try and go private. If it takes that, do it. Because I just feel sometimes like the whole country's falling apart, doesn't it?
No,
I mean,
it really does.
We're the fifth largest economy in the world, and look at us.
It really does. And I wonder if this is something that happens with all generations of adults, that you become an adult, sort of looking at the world for what it really is, and then you realise, oh my goodness, things are really not as good as I thought they were when I was growing up. Because I do recall a time when I was younger when I just thought everything was great back in my day.
Yeah, that's just called growing up, when you have to start paying your own bills and facing reality,
That is depressing, isn't it?
We've been having lots of your views too on things. Jeanette says it's utterly ridiculous to give people who are on top money help with their energy bills. Labour constantly bleat on about targeted support, yet in practice they do the opposite.
And we spoke about A-level results. We've got A-level results coming up on Thursday. I think at 8:15 in the morning they get released there. Julie says, you're making me very nervous. My son gets his results on Thursday and is predicted 4 A stars. He's worked very hard and was getting over 90% in all mock exams and tests. But this may mean nothing. I'm scared. This is, of course, because, you know, they're saying markers who have been marking these exams have been told to mark a bit more harshly.
But Julie, no need to be worried, Julie. If he's predicted 4 A stars, he's not going to, even if some grades go down, it's not going to be much further down. He's still going to do well, isn't he,
But if he's got a university place that requires 3 A stars, which is the case at some of these top universities, an A is not good enough. You need 3 A stars.
Where did the star come from? When I was at school, it was just A's.
The star. Well,
stars
Julie,
come into the situation.
Get in touch on Thursday.
Yeah, let us know how he does.
Let us know.
Actually, let us know if he wants to
have you on.
Yeah, get the results live, that sort of thing. TV loves a bit of that.
We'll look forward to hearing from you. But now, after the break, Afghanistan marks their 1-year anniversary since the Taliban took over the country. A very grim and unfortunate anniversary, of course. Home Secretary Preeti Patel has expressed her tremendous pride in the government's controversial evacuation operation following the fall of Kabul to the Taliban. We'll be speaking about this further with the former Afghan Chief of Public Health. But before that, here's the morning's headlines with Rosie.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will set out a £29 billion plan later today to freeze energy bills for 6 months. Paid for, in part, by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies, he says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. The Labour Party claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree, describing the opposition's plan as an illusion. Iran's foreign ministry says Sir Salman Rushdie and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left the author with life-changing injuries. The 75-year-old author was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The government has announced the annual increase in rail fares across England will be lower this year than the rate of inflation. Ticket price rises are traditionally linked to July's Retail Prices Index, which is yet to be published. The Department for Transport said, in addition, the increased prices will be delayed until March in a bid to help struggling households. A hosepipe ban's going to be imposed in Cornwall and parts of Devon from August the 23rd. South West Water says it's the first time in 26 years they've had to implement the measures, despite, they say, making vast improvements to water storage. They are now the 6th water company in the UK that's had to introduce restrictions after an official drought was declared across parts of England on Friday. Well, lots of the UK is braced for 3 days of yellow weather warnings for thunderstorms. The Met Office says there's an increased risk of power cuts and flash flooding across parts of England and Wales. Scotland and Northern Ireland saw similar yellow warnings in place from yesterday morning as heavy rain hit the region. Well, for the southwest and southeast of England, those warnings are expected to stay until Wednesday. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:37 and this is To The Point with Alex Phillips and myself, Mercy Moroki, on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Now, Home Secretary Priti Patel has expressed her tremendous pride in the government's controversial evacuation operation following the fall of Kabul to the Taliban 1 year ago. The Afghan government fell on this day, and what followed was desperate scenes at Kabul airport as thousands of people tried to escape, even clinging to planes as they attempted to take off.
Yes, well, over the past year, tens of thousands of Afghans have been evacuated out of the country and are now refugees around the world, including here in the UK.
Well, joining us in the studio now is Dr. Mohammed Hakmal, who is the former Afghan public health chief and known to have developed many groundbreaking programmes in his country. He was given sanctuary in the UK a few years ago when he was kidnapped and tortured by the Taliban. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, 1 year since that evacuation. Talk to us about what the situation was like a year ago before the Taliban came into power and what you're seeing today.
Well, unfortunately, during the last 1 year, so at least, before 1 year, the situation was not that much worse. At least women were allowed to work, girls were also allowed, to go to school. Schools was open. But unfortunately, since 1 year, so the schools are closed. The level of humanitarian crisis is also getting worse because of the support that we are getting in the ground is not enough. So today, 2 in 3 Afghans, they are hungry. And we have 10 million children, they need urgent humanitarian support. 2 million children are malnourished. And so the situation is not at all, specifically the recent conflict of the Ukrainian. So that's also created a kind of challenges in Afghanistan. So the international community that they were supporting, support at least, before the Ukrainian support, with starting the conflict in Ukraine, so that also put Afghanistan in a kind of isolation, from the eyes of the international support.
And we've just mentioned there that Priti Patel said she's got tremendous pride in that evacuation effort. Is that the feeling you have? Are you proud of how Britain and the international community reacted, or actually do you feel something else?
Well, we have been grateful, for the international community support in different areas. So during the last 2 decades, so the international communities was our strong partners in development and also in achievement. But having said that, even it's not the failure of only Afghans, it was also the failure of the international community because we had a strong kind of collaborations, partnership with the international community. So, and at least these days when I'm also hearing, so the Afghans are also deprived of those educational opportunities from scholarship. UK government, so they were providing, kind of tuning scholarship. But unfortunately this year, Afghans, these educated community that they are still trying, to come also for the education, they are removed from the list. So it's also not only UK, many parts of the world that they were providing scholarship opportunity for the Afghans. Unfortunately, Afghans are also removed from that list. And sometimes when we are also seeing neighboring countries, they are also representing Afghanistan. That's also the painful side of these things that we are also seeing in 1 year. So none of these neighboring countries can represent Afghanistan in any of those international platforms. So this opportunity should be given, to the Afghans, either Afghan politicians or maybe Afghan diasporas, that they are living. Because as long as we see, the current government has not been legitimate or had not been recognized by the international community. So that chance should also not be totally, taken, from the Afghans.
I mean, therein lies the problem because, you know, the West spent $1 trillion and 3 decades fighting the Taliban, who are essentially now in power. As a result, there are a lot of sanctions against Afghanistan. And the worry is that if the West suddenly turns around and starts aiding the government, that what was the point in trying to fight against them in the first place? What do you think the response should be? Does there need to be sort of more targeted aid straight to people where it's needed?
Well, there is 3 important areas for us. First, the Afghans should be also involved in most of the discussion that they are also deciding any kind of priorities, even in terms of humanitarian supports in Afghanistan. Second thing, so even if the foreign aid is also going through the international partner, through the international non-governmental organization, so the admin cost should be also reduced, and most focus should be also put it on to increase, the impact at the service delivery point, because now the admin cost is very high for most of those international organizations that they are implementing, the services, and we don't see, this enough impact also in the ground. The third one is, again, we are grateful for the international community support, but that's not enough. Specifically, as I mentioned, with the Ukrainian conflict, so the amount of the international support that we are getting in the ground, that has been significantly reduced. So that's why 10 million children also needs urgent support. As I mentioned earlier, 2 million children are also suffering, from the severe malnutrition. 2 out of 3 Afghans, they are also hungry, so they don't have, enough support also in the ground. So our expectation from the international community is to increase, their support, and also to move from those emergency support, and also to provide a kind of maintenance support to protect, this foundation that we built together with the international community during the last 2 decades.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask, in order to rebuild Afghanistan, you need, a workforce that includes women in it. You can't properly rebuild an economy if women are excluded from the economy. You're a doctor. What was your PhD? And you're obviously, I'm assuming, regardless of what it was, education's been a key part of your life. And I'm assuming you would want young girls to be able to go to school, get, those PhDs, doctorates like you. Well, how does it make you feel that women are being completely excluded from being able to do that in Afghanistan at the moment?
So Afghanistan, I think today it is the first country in the world that the women and also these girls, they are deprived of their education. But we also see, the international community discussing, with the current authorities, it is also, even I feel that shame that have the international community want something else for themselves when it's come to Afghanistan, and they are also discussing, the other priority rather than education. So our biggest expectation from the international community is also to work with the current authority in Afghanistan and get, the schools open to the girls, and also provide others freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of education, freedom of work, because now we have been totally isolated from the international community. So if the international community want us to be a very strong partner with them, as we were during the last 2 decades, so now we also need that level of support from the international community. International community should also listen to us. So you will also see, like yesterday there was a demonstration in Kabul, in streets, in different areas, people also come out, specifically those girls and also women, and they were asking, from the international support to help them, to open the school. But unfortunately, when we see in the international media, that is not reflecting, the reality. So our expectation from the international community is also to let, the Afghan, to work with the Afghan, to give them, those rights, that we are discussing, globally, for other countries.
Well, thank you so much for coming to speak to us this morning. It's amazing to get your perspective. Really appreciate you coming into the studio. That was Dr. Mohammed Hakmal there, who is the former Afghan public health chief. Really depressing situation, I think. And it many people, when the Taliban were saying, no, look, we're going to be a reformed organisation, and actually you can trust us, women will not be deprived of education. Many people said, oh, come on, pull the other one. Of course, there's no way this is a reformed Taliban. And we've sadly been proven right. And I'm not sure that it's right for Priti Patel to be saying she's tremendously proud.
Well, no,
of
it's quite ludicrous, actually, isn't it? Frankly. Yeah. What was so sad was, there'd been a trillion spent on trying to develop Afghanistan, and overnight, like that, it all changed because we just pulled the plug and went. I mean, it's just, to me, just utterly ludicrous. A waste of time, money, lives,
Yeah,
and a great tragedy.
Yes, indeed. Well, we were talking there about girls and women's rights, and this is another story closer to home on that subject. Scotland today becomes the first country in the world to protect the right to free period products in public spaces for girls and women.
Yeah, the Period Products Act means councils and education providers in Scotland are now legally required to ensure free sanitary products are available to anybody who needs them.
Yes, well, Labour MSP Monica Lennon campaigned for the legislation, which was unanimously backed in the Scottish Parliament in 2020, and she joins us now. Good morning, great to have you on the show for the first time, Monica. So just give us the rationale, I suppose, behind this, because it will be a kind of alien concept, you know, free period products. This is not something we've had in the UK before. So tell us how you managed to sell this idea.
Thank you. Well, I started researching this back in 2016 when I was first elected to the Scottish Parliament, looking at both the affordability and the accessibility of period products. And at that time, the Scottish Government wasn't doing any work on this. But by speaking to teachers, young people, looking at the experience of girls in particular, we found sadly that far too many were missing out on their education in the UK, in Scotland, because they didn't have access to pads and tampons when they needed them. And partly it was about education and stigma as well. We found that people were going to food banks but couldn't get period products because they weren't being donated. So there was a need, but there was a wider issue about just convenience, having access to products when you need them. So if you're in the workplace and you are someone who menstruates and your period comes on suddenly, you don't always have a spare pad in your back pocket. And when people women and girls saying that they didn't have the right coins, the machine wasn't working, so many practical issues. So a lot of it was about affordability, but then it became more about everyday access. And most people said they would continue to buy the products, their preferred brands, at the supermarket and so on, but just having that safety net in the workplace, in college, at school, that's made a big difference already. And today the legislation comes into force, but we've been doing the work in Scotland over the past few years.
Yeah, why on earth, I wonder, has this taken so long for something that seems as obvious as this to be put into place? I mean, during COVID, every single workplace had free COVID tests, it had free, antibiotic hand gel and stuff like that. And yet something that affects basically half the population on a regular basis has taken a huge campaign to get this up and running.
Yeah, it's a sign of progress. I think we can take a lot of comfort and hope from it. But you're right, for too long, the issues that affect the daily lives of women and girls haven't been a priority. And that's been the case round the world. Different governments have different political persuasions and colours. So even when you have a woman First Minister or Prime Minister, it doesn't mean that equality will just trickle down. So it's been really refreshing to have really open discussions about periods, about the menopause. And my inbox every single day, I get a different perspective from someone who says, I'm really glad this has been talked about. Even if they feel they won't have to use the free products or they'll continue to buy them, it just gives that peace of mind. It's about dignity. So our schools go back in Scotland this week, and it's great, I think, for young people to know, for young girls particularly, and even those in primary school who might be 10, 11, starting their periods early, that they don't need to be embarrassed about asking for permission to get a spare pad out of the office. It'll be in the toilet, there'll be posters up, and there's an app. So if you've got a smartphone, download the Pick Up My Period app. If you're visiting Scotland, give it a try. It's really easy to use.
We've got some showers downstairs, and I was surprised when I actually walked in there one day and they have those period products on offer, just, free for women. And I was kind of taken aback because I'm used to going into public toilets and then you have those horrible machines that you have to put £1 in or whatever to just get a pad or a tampon. Yeah. And I just think that's ludicrous, actually. But just to play devil's advocate for a moment, so obviously this is government funded. you know, there will be people saying, look, there are certain products I consider as necessities for myself. Why is it that, you know, girls can get this one product paid for them, but, you know, boys or other people can't get other products that they consider are necessary sanitary products for themselves?
Well, periods are a normal part of life, and when we go to a public bathroom in this country, toilet roll is provided, the facility to wash our hands is provided, and for me, having access to period products should be normal, it should be mainstream. And we actually know from the research in Scotland that this will make a difference to our economy. It will help people take part in school and education and in the workplace. And already we're seeing many employers across Scotland, whether they run a pub, an office, a building company, do this voluntarily. The legislation in Scotland doesn't mandate employers to do this. But given the benefits of looking after your workers, making customers feel valued, many people are doing this in their own businesses because it actually has multi-benefits. So I think it makes good business sense as well as being good for people's sense of worth and being valued in the workplace. I think that the day of running to the toilet with a tampon up your sleeve because you're embarrassed that your work colleagues might know you're on your periods, I think those days, they're still here, but it's becoming much more open, and we're seeing workplace policies around menstruation, around menopause becoming the norm.
Well, we do have to leave it there, but Monica, Lennon, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this really important issue. I was trying to play devil's advocate there, but I have to say it's hard because it's hard to argue against, to be honest. In my opinion, you might think different, let us know. But now let's move on to our final story.
Yeah, universities are warning that this Thursday's A-level results in England and Wales could leave thousands of students falling short of their predicted grades and so missing their university places.
Yes, well, after 2 years of record results, the government told this year's school leavers, who were the first to sit A-level exams since the pandemic began, that exams would be graded at a midpoint between pandemic rises and normal levels in 2019. In other words, they're going to be graded more harshly.
Yeah, after the unexpected low results in Scotland, where pupils have already received their results, universities fear this will be replicated in England. The overall pass rate in Scotland fell from 89.3% in 2020 to 78.9% this summer.
That's why joining us now is author and principal examiner for A-levels, Dr. Tony Breslin. Hi, Dr. Tony. Sadly, we don't have too much longer, so I want to really just get to the meat of all of this. For parents who are worried, we had parents, Julie, got in touch and said she's scared that her son won't get those 4 A stars. What do you have to say to parents who are in that position?
Well, look, it's very difficult, but we've had, I've spent the last, and I'm a former principal examiner, not a current principal examiner, but I've spent the last couple of kind of Augusts speaking on shows like this, against the narrative that A-levels are too easy and children are getting the grades too easy and so forth. And guess what? Now, this year, we're talking about them being too hard. Look, young people have worked incredibly hard for their grades. The exam regulator, this grading season is likely to be less tough than 2019 for the reasons you've said, the last time that written papers were used for grading. So they're likely to be less tough than that. They're likely to be less tough than that last year. But the regulator is seeking to get examiners to move back to a kind of 2019 standards. So that means they're a bit harder than last year in terms of the grade allocations. But my strong sense is the universities will be well aware of this. If students get the grades they have been offered, then they ought to get the place. Examiners will be extremely sensitive this year about grading. If anything, they might be, the tendency will be to give the benefit of the doubt to the candidate. Examiners are mindful of the disruption that many young people have experienced. So my sense is that actually we need to address this on Wednesday and Thursday when we know what those results are. and we need to make sure that our universities are work as ingeniously as they can. They will be committing to the offers they've made. Maybe at the margins, those students who are one grade off, or maybe the difference between an A star and an A, maybe those students might not get that place that last year they would have got, or the year before they would have got. But if you achieve the grades that you have been, that are your offer, then you should get your place. And I'm pretty convinced that the universities will, will honour those promises, and will deal with the fallout from them as they present themselves at the start of term.
It was great to hear from you on this topic. Thanks so much, Dr. Tony Bresner, who's a former principal examiner for A-levels, talking to us about those critical results for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, I don't know how many, lots of people, lots of kids on Thursday.
Thursday, 8:15 a.m. That's when those results get uploaded onto that system. I was in that exact situation.
Do you still get the paper, the envelope? Is it just on a system?
But then you can log into the system at 8:15 to see if you've got your university place, and then you can obviously pick up your A-level results by hand. But the getting into the university, really, for many people, will be that key thing, won't it? Well, that is it from us here at To The Point. But don't go away. Up next is The Briefing with Esther McVeigh. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give